It had been a usual Saturday morning, nothing extraordinary. The house was still, the only sounds being the hum of the coffee maker and the distant chirp of birds outside. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the list of errands for the day while nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. A quiet routine, one I had come to love. My husband, Chris, was always up earlier than me. He had a way of waking up with purpose, already mentally prepared for the day, while I struggled to shake off the remnants of sleep. But today, something felt different. We'd been married for 6 years, and our lives together had always seemed like a perfect balance of love, trust, and mutual respect. I'd always trusted Chris completely. He'd always been my rock, steady, reliable, and true. But recently, I noticed a shift, small but undeniable. It was nothing I could put my finger on at first, just subtle changes in his behavior that nagged at the back of my mind. He had started keeping his phone on silent all the time. It wasn't something I thought much about at first. I figured he was just focusing more on work or trying to cut down on distractions. But there was always this strange, almost tangible energy around him whenever his phone buzzed. He'd quickly glance at it, then dismiss it with a nonchalant, "It's nothing." In the beginning, I thought I was overthinking it. After all, we'd been through enough together. Our marriage had withstood the challenges of both personal and professional upheavals. But then I noticed that Chris had stopped leaving his phone lying around like he used to. Before, he'd leave it face up on the counter, sometimes even in the living room while we watched TV. Now he always kept it with him, and it stayed silent. I didn't think too much about it at first, telling myself he was just being mindful of his work calls, especially since he had taken on more responsibilities at his law firm. But there was a quiet unease growing inside me, an instinctive feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the late nights at the office that started to stretch longer than usual, or his sudden preoccupation with his social media accounts. When I mentioned it once, playfully, almost as a joke, he just laughed and waved it off, saying, "It's all work stuff, babe." I wanted to believe him, but then, the last few weeks, it had been hard to ignore the nagging voice in the back of my head. I had always trusted Chris completely, so why now did I feel like there was something he wasn't telling me? I didn't know what I was looking for, but every time he turned his phone face down, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. And then, it happened. That Saturday morning, when he stepped out of the shower, his phone was left on the nightstand, still silent, face down, just as it always was. I had no intention of snooping, no real desire to invade his privacy, but the phone was there, unguarded, and the doubt in my mind whispered that I should check it, just to ease my growing suspicion. What harm could it do? I hesitated for a moment, guilt swirling in my chest. But then I thought of all the moments we had shared, the late-night conversations, the plans we made for the future. Was I really about to let my doubts and insecurities destroy what we had? I grabbed the phone, my hands trembling slightly, and flipped it over. There it was. A message from a contact I didn't recognize, with a simple, "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." The text hit me like a punch to the gut. My world tilted. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I read the message again, hoping that I had somehow misread it. But no, there it was, plain and clear. Chris was having an affair. I could feel my breath quicken, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The logical part of my brain told me to stop, to think this through, but the rest of me, my gut, my heart, was already unraveling. I scrolled through the conversation, my fingers frozen with disbelief, as I read the flirtations, the inside jokes, and the plans they had made. The messages were too intimate, too familiar for it to be just a casual exchange. It was a betrayal. My chest tightened with the realization. I dropped the phone back onto the nightstand as if it had burned me, stumbling back a few steps. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just discovered. How could he do this? Why hadn't I seen it? For all our years together, all the laughter and memories, how had I been so blind? The tears came suddenly, without warning. The dam inside me burst, and I was left standing in the middle of our bedroom, my hands shaking, trying to piece together the fragments of a life that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. I loved Chris. I thought I knew him. But now, in this one cruel moment, everything I had built with him seemed like a lie. The trust I had placed in him was shattered. and I was left to pick up the pieces of a world that no longer felt safe. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the phone resting innocently on the nightstand, mocking me. The walls of our bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating, closing in on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and every part of me screamed to confront him, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I needed to think. I needed clarity. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, saw the affection, the promises, the connection he'd shared with someone else. My mind raced, bouncing between the truth I had just uncovered and the life I thought I had with Chris. The house felt eerily quiet now. It was like the world had gone still, waiting for the moment I'd decide to take action. I tried to steady my breath, trying to collect myself before he came back. But how could I be so wrong? How could I have missed all these signs? Was I that naive? That blind? For the past few weeks, I had chalked up his behavior to the pressures of work, or maybe just stress from his recent promotion. He had been distant, sure, but I had convinced myself that it was all in my head. After all, we had been through so much together. We'd weathered the storm of long hours, late meetings, and the ups and downs of daily life. I thought we were solid, unbreakable, but now, everything seemed like a lie. I needed to know more. One message wasn't enough. I couldn't allow myself to just walk away from this without the truth. I had to have it all. I reached for the phone again, my hands clammy, my heart thumping louder in my chest with each second that passed. This time, I didn't hesitate. I unlocked it. The screen lit up with notifications, none of which mattered. My eyes scanned through his texts, his emails, even his social media accounts. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-time slip, an innocent mistake. This was an affair, a full-blown, ongoing relationship. The messages were just the tip of the iceberg. There were photos, dates, and even mentions of places they had visited together. A weekend getaway, dinner dates, plans for the future. All these moments that Chris had shared with someone else while I had been right there, unaware. I felt my stomach churn, as though the very foundation of my world was crumbling beneath me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was everything I had ever feared, now laid bare in front of me. Every future plan we'd discussed, every conversation we'd had, all the intimacy we had shared. Was it all a lie? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder, a convenient wife, while he found solace elsewhere? A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my lips, and I quickly covered my mouth, as if trying to hold the sound inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead I felt paralyzed, stuck in a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't process fast enough. The tears began again, but this time they were different. These weren't just tears of hurt. They were tears of anger, of frustration, of betrayal. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was irrefutable. I had been living in a facade, a bubble of my own creation, where everything was perfect. But now that bubble had burst, and there was no going back. In the midst of the chaos inside my mind, one thought stood out. I couldn't let him get away with this. But how? What was I supposed to do now? I could confront him, throw everything in his face, demand an explanation. But I knew that would be too easy for him. He would say the right things, apologize, maybe even promise to make things right. And I, in my emotional turmoil, might just believe him. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. No, I needed a plan. I needed to take control of this situation, not let him spin his lies and manipulate me into accepting the same old promises. I had to get to the bottom of it, once and for all. I stood in the middle of the room, my mind racing through the options, trying to figure out what would be the best course of action. Should I confront him immediately? Should I wait for him to come home and play the part of the loving wife, pretending I didn't know? I knew the decision wasn't easy, but I also knew I couldn't live with this doubt and uncertainty hanging over me. I needed closure, whether that came from him admitting the truth or from me walking away, finally free of the chains I didn't even know I had been bound by. The clock on the wall ticked, louder now in the silence of the room. I glanced at it. Only 10:30 a.m. He wouldn't be home for hours. I had time to figure out what I was going to do next. One thing was certain, Everything was about to change. The hours that followed were agonizing. Every minute stretched into what felt like an eternity. My thoughts swirled in a haze of confusion, anger, and hurt. I couldn't bring myself to put the phone down. I couldn't stop going back to the messages, to the lies. The more I looked, the more I found. I had to stop, but I couldn't. It was like a magnetic pull, each message sinking deeper into my chest like a shard of glass. By the time Chris finally came home, it felt like the world had shifted beneath me, and I had no idea where to stand anymore. The house was too quiet, too still. He walked in, as if nothing had changed, greeting me with his usual smile, a smile I realized I had grown accustomed to, a smile that now felt like a mask. "Hey babe," he said, setting his bag down by the door. "How was your day?" His voice sounded too normal, too casual, like it hadn't been hours since I'd discovered the truth. I couldn't even bring myself to respond right away. I just stared at him, my heart racing, 1,000 thoughts crashing through my mind. How could he look at me like that? How could he pretend everything was okay? I stood there, unable to speak at first. The silence between us felt suffocating, and I knew that the moment I opened my mouth, everything would change. The perfect life we had built would shatter, and there would be no turning back. Finally, I took a breath, trying to steady myself. My voice came out calm, but I could feel the storm raging inside me. "Chris," I started, my words slow, deliberate. "I know about the texts." He froze. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing. His face went pale, his smile faltering for the briefest of seconds. "What are you talking about?" His voice wavered, but he quickly recovered, his usual confidence returning. "What texts?" I could see it now. The lie was already in motion, and my heart twisted as I realized how far he was willing to go to cover it up. How many times had he lied to me? How many times had he promised me that everything was fine? My throat tightened with emotion, and I took another step closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "The messages, the ones you've been sending to her," I said, the words finally spilling out. Each syllable a weight I couldn't hold back any longer. "I saw them, Chris. I saw everything." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. His eyes flickered, as if searching for something, an excuse, a lie, a way to worm his way out of this. But there was nothing left. I could see the guilt in his eyes, and it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "I never meant for you to find out like this," he said finally, his voice weak, his posture slumping. "I didn't want to hurt you." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Hurt me? You've already done that, Chris. You've been hurting me for God knows how long." My voice cracked, but I held it together. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" He stopped himself, swallowing hard. His face was flushed, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. "I never wanted it to happen like this. It was a mistake." A mistake. I could feel the anger bubbling up in my chest, hot and sharp. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been seeing someone else? And you call that a mistake? You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you think it's just a mistake." Chris opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't going to let him twist this anymore. "I've read everything," I said, my tone cold now, almost detached. "I've seen the pictures, the weekend getaways, the texts about missing her, planning your next meeting. You've been carrying on an affair, Chris. And now you're standing here trying to tell me it was just a mistake." His face flushed deeper, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. But there was none. The silence stretched out again, the weight of the truth too much for him to deny anymore. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you, it's just, things got complicated." Complicated? My mind reeled. Was this really happening? Was he seriously trying to justify his betrayal with a word like complicated? "Complicated," I repeated, my voice shaking. "What about us, Chris? What about everything we've built? What about the trust we've had for years? Was that complicated too?" His face contorted with shame, and I saw the first real glimpse of remorse in his eyes. But it was too late for apologies. The damage was already done. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice raw, his shoulders sagging. "I messed up. I don't deserve you." The words stung, but they weren't the words I needed to hear. I needed to hear the truth, not some empty confession. I needed to know why, how this had happened. how he could throw everything away for someone else. "Don't tell me you messed up," I said, my voice firm now. "Tell me why. Tell me why you felt the need to betray me. What was missing in our marriage that you had to go somewhere else to find?" He looked at me, his eyes flickering with emotion, but the answer never came. There was no real explanation, no satisfying justification that could undo the hurt he had caused. "You never gave me a chance to explain," he said quietly, but it felt hollow, like a last-ditch effort to salvage his dignity. I took a step back, the finality of his words sinking in. This wasn't about mistakes anymore. This was about choices, and the choice he made had destroyed everything. "I don't need an explanation, Chris," I said softly. "I need you to leave." Chris stood there, frozen, as my words hung heavy in the air between us. The silence that followed felt suffocating, each second stretching into eternity. His eyes pleaded with me, but I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. I had seen the truth, and now there was no turning back. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was no longer the person I thought he was. "Please, just let me explain," he said again. But there was a desperation in his voice now, something I hadn't heard before. It was the kind of desperation I should have recognized earlier, the kind that was all too familiar to me now. But it was too late for explanations. His words felt like empty promises, like a fragile balloon that was already deflating. "I don't need you to explain, Chris," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "I've already seen enough. The truth is right in front of me. You made your choice, and it wasn't me." His face crumpled, a mixture of guilt and regret flooding his expression. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. I wasn't interested in hearing more. I had heard it all before. The excuses, the rationalizations, the promises that things would change. But none of it mattered anymore. He stepped forward then, his voice shaky. "Please, just don't do this. Don't throw everything away over a mistake." "A mistake?" I said, shaking my head, the anger bubbling up once again. "This wasn't a mistake, Chris. This was a choice you made, over and over again. You've been lying to me, hiding things from me, and now you want me to believe it was just a mistake." My voice cracked, and I felt the lump in my throat tighten. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away." His face softened with regret, but there was no redemption in those eyes. The man I had once trusted, the man I thought I knew so well, was a stranger now, and I was left holding the shattered pieces of a life I had thought was perfect. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice breaking. But his apology didn't reach me. It didn't even feel real. I stood there for a long moment, staring at him. My mind was a whirlwind, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of something much larger than this moment. I had spent years of my life with Chris. Years that were filled with good memories, shared dreams, and quiet moments. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that I had been betrayed. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep living this lie. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, Chris. I need you to leave." His face fell, and he took a step back, as if he couldn't quite grasp what I was saying. "Leave?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You want me to leave?" I nodded, the decision weighing heavily on me but feeling like the only option. "Yes, I do." He stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was breaking, but it was a different kind of heartbreak now, the kind that comes with realizing that the love you thought was unshakable was built on sand. "Okay," he said finally, his voice distant, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "I'll go." I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I turned away, walking back to the bedroom, needing space to think, to breathe. But the air felt heavier now, as if the weight of everything I had just uncovered was pressing down on me. I could hear him gathering his things in the other room, the sound of him moving about in a way that felt so foreign, so final. The silence was deafening. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. I didn't cry, not yet. I couldn't. The tears that had come earlier were spent, and now I felt numb. I kept thinking about the years we had together. How many times had I trusted him? How many times had I believed in him when he promised me he would never hurt me? but promises, like everything else, could be broken. A sudden thought struck me. What now? What was I supposed to do with this gaping hole that Chris had left in my heart? How could I ever move past the betrayal, the lies, the deceit? I didn't know the answer yet, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this house, in this life, pretending like everything was fine. It wasn't fine. It hadn't been fine for a long time. I stood up from the bed, walking to the closet, where Chris's things still hung neatly. For a brief moment, I thought about taking down his clothes, packing them up. But I stopped myself. He could do that. He could deal with his own stuff. It was time for me to take care of mine. I walked out of the bedroom, hearing the sound of the front door closing behind him. It was done. He was gone. But the aftermath had just begun. The door clicked softly behind him, and the silence that followed felt both deafening and oddly peaceful. I stood still for a moment, listening to the emptiness of the house, the echo of his departure reverberating in the corners of my mind. It was over, and yet it didn't feel like it. There was no sense of finality, no sense of relief. I should have felt something, anger, vindication, even closure, but all I felt was lost. I walked through the house as if seeing everything for the first time. The framed pictures on the walls, the trinkets we had picked up together, the books on the shelf, all seemed to mock me. These were reminders of a life I had thought was mine, but now they were just objects, empty and hollow. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to steady my breath. My hands still trembled, but the numbness was starting to set in. I had thought that confronting him would bring relief, closure, maybe even the ability to move on. But now, I realized that I didn't know how to move forward. There were too many questions, too much uncertainty. What was I supposed to do now? Where was I supposed to go from here? I didn't know. I sank down onto the couch, feeling the weight of it all crash over me. I had trusted Chris. I had given him everything. But now, everything was different. My world had tilted on its axis, and I was struggling to regain my footing. How could I trust again? How could I ever love like I had before? The tears finally came, slow at first, then in a torrent, as the grief of what had just happened caught up to me. I cried for the loss of my marriage, for the loss of myself, and for the years I had spent believing in something that had been nothing more than a lie. I cried until there was nothing left, until I was exhausted. Then I wiped my face and stood up, a quiet resolve settling in my chest. I wasn't done yet. This wasn't how my story was going to end. I still had to figure out what came next, but I would figure it out. I would rebuild. The first few days after Chris left were a blur. I spent most of my time in a fog, drifting through the motions of everyday life, but never truly present. There were phone calls I had to make, canceling joint accounts, notifying the bank, making arrangements for the legal side of things. I could barely focus, my thoughts always drifting back to the mess he had left behind. But I knew I had to get through it, one step at a time. The hardest part, though, was the silence. The house was so quiet without him. I had become so used to the hum of his presence, the sound of his voice, the small interactions that made up our daily life. Now, it was just me. And that was both terrifying and liberating. I started to clean. I threw away things that reminded me of him. Old receipts, his cluttered piles of papers, the things that seemed to belong more to a stranger than the man I had loved. It felt like I was erasing a part of my life. And while it was painful, it also gave me a sense of control. I started making changes, small ones at first. I rearranged the living room, moved my favorite chair by the window. I took a walk every morning, enjoying the solitude and the quiet. Slowly, I began to feel something like peace. But the real change came when I decided to call my best friend, Emma. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since everything started to unravel. When I finally picked up the phone, I couldn't hold back the tears. "I need help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do anymore." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "You take it one day at a time, okay? Don't rush yourself. You'll find your way." She was right. I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to breathe. I needed to take care of myself first. That was the beginning of my healing. I started therapy, something I'd been putting off for years. I began to work on rebuilding my self-esteem and rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship. I went to the gym, signed up for painting classes, small things that brought me joy. I made sure to surround myself with friends who supported me, who saw me for who I truly was, not just as someone's wife. As the weeks passed, I began to feel stronger. The emptiness that had consumed me started to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to live again. About a month after Chris had left, I received an email that I never expected. It was from him, Chris. My heart skipped a beat, but I opened it anyway, unsure of what I would find. Catherine, the message was short, just a few lines. I've had time to think, and I know what I did was unforgivable. I'm sorry. I wish I could go back and undo everything. But I understand if you can't forgive me. I stared at the words, my chest tightening as old memories flooded back. The pain, the anger, the hurt. It was all still there, just beneath the surface. But something had changed in me. I had changed. I wasn't the woman who would have begged for an explanation or hoped for a reconciliation. I had learned the hard way that people make choices, and sometimes those choices have consequences. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't need to. I realized that my life was no longer about Chris. It was about me, about what I wanted, about the person I was becoming. And I wasn't going to let him come back into my life and undo the progress I had made. I had spent so much time giving myself to him, to the idea of us, but now I was reclaiming myself. And that was worth more than any apology he could offer. As months passed, my life began to take shape again. I found new purpose, new excitement, and a renewed sense of independence. I began to see the world differently. What had once seemed like a tragedy had become the catalyst for my growth. I started a new job, one I'd been offered after a chance meeting at a friend's gathering. It was a career change that I hadn't even considered before, but it felt right. I was finally doing something for me, something that allowed me to grow in ways I had never imagined. I made new friends, traveled to places I had always wanted to see, and found peace in my own company. I learned to embrace the quiet moments, the ones I used to dread, and discovered that solitude didn't have to be lonely. And then, one day, I found myself smiling again. Not because I was trying to hold on to the past, but because I was excited for what was ahead. My heart had healed, piece by piece, and now I was ready for a new chapter. I no longer needed Chris's validation. I had found my own. The sun streamed through the window that morning, warm and golden. I stood by the window, looking out at the world, feeling the weight of the journey I had been through. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free.